Jen, in your career as a consultant, I understand you've worked with hundreds of writers, many of whom have gone on to be staffed as writers on shows. They've sold pilots. What are you doing that you feel has made the difference to those who've crossed over versus those who haven't? Or maybe there's not one thing, it's sort of based on a full package?
I think it's based on many things. I would say part of what I do with writers is emotionally, I help them to work on what is holding them back. So just as in story, we understand there is a weakness or a flaw that is stopping the hero from achieving the goal. With the writers that I work with, I help them to work on what do they feel internally is holding them back. And very often, I think I can say writers who grasp my story system on structure mixed with they believe that they're going to be a working writer is what leads them to the outcome. So I would say it's, that's the ideal situation. It could be one or the other as well. Like I think story, just like in life, like when I think about everything that I learned through my 17 years of working in the business before I started my own business, and the knocks that I went through during that time, and the ego that was involved in a lot of that, and how through moving through the obstacles and then hitting an all is lost moment really led me to a deeper part of the life process. I think it's the same for writers. And as you mentioned earlier, I also think that writers can be an old soul at an early age due to what happens in their life process. And writers could come into writing at 50 plus and really have something to say and have it really thought out incredibly well. And I think it's through, I'm a definite believer that through the story structure process mixed with the emotional work and the belief in the writing is what leads to the outcome. And part of the work that I do is because, I've been working in the business 24, 25 years now. So I can tell them where they're at. I can instill belief, which I have to say is probably one of the greatest. There's nothing I love more than reading a script and being able to say to the writer, you are tremendously talented. You have a gift, and this is your calling. And helping them to believe that.
Do you have them do a personal inventory of what they think's holding them back? And if you do, how much of that really matches up for what you see?
I would say our negative narratives are so internally ingrained that I would say it's rare that we can pinpoint it, like certainly in my process. The great thing is now many writers are doing 5 coaching sessions with me. And through the 5 coaching sessions, the great thing for me is I can see things like that. I can see what is holding them back and what they need to work on. Like there are a lot of times where you can have incredibly talented people who don't believe it or don't see it. And so they get in their own way of the outcome happening. So through the coaching process, you are able to help them see, what is working. Like Aaron Spelling taught me, always, always, always start your notes with what works about the story before you dive into what could be better. And I think through through doing that with writers, I have come to recognize a lot of my meetings I will do in the way of the first 20 minutes. We'll talk about what's going on in your life right now. How was writing this last week or last couple weeks? How did you feel about what you wrote or rewrote in your script this week? Were there any hurdles that held you back? And why do you think they held you back? And I think through going through the process of what is moving them forward versus what is holding them back, it does help shed light on where they need to focus on.
I know someone mentioned in another interview with you that you have an ability to make people feel safe, and I definitely feel that right now. When you meet with someone who you feel these walls up and it's a lot of ego and hubris and maybe they're not sharing weaknesses, is there a way to kind of get them comfortable? Because some people don't feel okay with weakness. Some people are on the flip side and that's all they know and that's all their narrative is.
Yes.
And then there's others that anything they say, they're always on top. And I've seen that a lot in LA. So how do you sometimes make that person more human?
I think that is a great question. I would say the biggest way I go into that is I give an example. I'll say when I staffed 15 shows and I would meet with writers up to an hour at a time, what I was looking for in that hour is, are they accessible to their own story? They might be able to say, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me, but not be vulnerable in the revelation of that process. And a large part of what I was looking for staffing-wise was, is that a well that can be accessed? Or is the ego or is the wall too big to where it isn't something that is penetrable? So I think, and I will talk with writers about this directly. I'll say things like, you need to recognize that your gold as a writer is being able to communicate what you've gone through and recognize that it's almost like you need to detach from your story and not connect shame with it. It's your story. It's what you're drawing from. And I'm going to tell you, executives, the greatest thing they want to know is how big is your well. And the more vulnerability that you show in a meeting with regards to why you'd be the perfect writer to write on this show and have a backup of personal stories that exemplify why you'd be the best writer, that's what will land you a job. So being vulnerable is key in that process.
And the flip side, the one that's just the open wound and it's all gold, but at some point you got to pull it together to kind of get some stuff going. What do you tell that person?
Well, that's the healing process too. Like I can tell you, I've had 10 friends with cancer. Since my own divorce, I've probably helped 25 people through divorce. And there is, like when you first go through the divorce or the diagnosis, there is a crazy time that's happening psychologically. An absolute shift has happened in your world. And that shift can cause you to be overly emotional. And yet the gift is be in that. Be in the over emotion and know that it is going to scale back in time. So I think if I have a writer who's too raw and too in it, I'll say to them, like, maybe now isn't the right time for you to explore this specific thing. Maybe you should take a break from this and write something that is a little removed from the pain that is involved with this story. And I have found that works a lot. And then when they come back to it, they're ready to move through it. Like, say, for example, when I wrote Change Your Story, Change Your Life, it was enough time had passed since I had gone through that loss that I was ready to explore it. And I was ready to be responsible for my own part in the outcome. And I think when you're going through healing and when you're going through trauma, that it's just part of the life process. So I think there's, in my opinion, an advantage to being over emotional, but knowing when you have to scale back and when you have to take a break and then re-explore so that you can utilize that emotion, but come from a stronger place because you've had more time to process it.